All right, let's dive in. We've got a viewer request today, something a little different.
Oh, cool. What you got?
So, someone sent us this YouTube video by a Catholic priest, Father Mike Schmitz.
Okay.
He's talking about original sin. You know, that whole Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden thing.
Yeah.
I know. Sounds a little Sunday school, right? But trust me, this guy, Father Mike, he's got a way of making it relevant, even if you're not, super religious.
I'm intrigued. Where does he even start with something like that?
Well, he kicks it off with this story about getting sick. Like, really sick. The kind where you just want to crawl into bed and forget the world exists.
Ugh, I know that feeling.
And then he asks this question, and this is where it gets interesting. He's like, when we get physically sick, what's the first thing we want to know?
I guess, where did I get this from? Like, how did I catch this bug?
Exactly. Because knowing the source helps us figure out how to treat it, right?
Right. So is he applying that same logic to, like, the human condition?
You're reading my mind. He's basically saying, look around. We see so much suffering, so much brokenness, both in ourselves and in the world. What if we trace that suffering back to its source? Could it help us find a path to healing?
That's a pretty powerful way to frame it.
Right. And according to Father Mike, a big part of that answer lies in the book of Genesis.
Oh, okay. The first book of the Bible, right?
The one and only. Specifically, he points to chapters 1 to 3.
Okay, so creation, Adam and Eve, the fall, that whole shebang.
You got it. I'll admit, I haven't cracked open Genesis in a while. Maybe use a little refresher. What are the key takeaways from those chapters?
Well, Genesis 1 to 3, it's kind of like the foundation of the whole Judeo-Christian worldview,
Right.
It sets the stage for understanding our relationship with God, with each other, and even with ourselves.
Okay, so walk us through it. What exactly went down in the Garden of Eden? I mean, we all know the basics, but...
Well, it starts with God creating everything perfect, right? Including humans who are given free will.
Right, that whole made in God's image thing.
Exactly. But then Adam and Eve, they choose to disobey God.
By eating the forbidden fruit, right? Classic.
Yep. And that act of disobedience, it's traditionally called the fall because it represents a separation from that original state of harmony with God.
Okay, and that's where this idea of original sin comes in, right?
Yeah.
This idea that we inherit this fallen state from Adam and Eve.
Right. It's like this kind of inherited spiritual baggage,
I'll be honest, I've always struggled with that concept. It feels a little unfair. Like, why am I being held responsible for something Adam and Eve did way back when?
I think a lot of people wrestle with that. It can feel like, what did I do to deserve this? And Father Mike actually acknowledges that. He prefers the term original wound.
Original wound. That's interesting.
It is. It still acknowledges that we're born into a world marked by brokenness, but it removes that blame and shame thing that often comes with the word sin.
Okay, I can see how that would be a more palatable way to frame it. So it's not about being inherently bad or evil?
Exactly. It's more like we're born with a predisposition to certain, spiritual ailments, you could say.
I like that analogy. We inherit certain genetic predispositions.
Yeah.
Right? Some folks are prone to heart disease. Others might have a family history of diabetes.
Exactly. And the original wound is kind of like that. It's a vulnerability we inherit that affects our spiritual well-being.
So it's not saying we're doomed or destined to be messed up.
Not at all. Father Mike is very clear that even with this inherited wound, humans are still inherently good, still made in God's image.
So we've got this original wound. How does it actually show up in our lives?
Well, Father Mike breaks it down into 3 key areas: our relationship with God, our relationships with each other, and our relationship with ourselves.
Okay, those are pretty big categories. Let's unpack each of those, starting with our relationship with God. How does this wound affect that?
Well, imagine it like this. There's this inherent longing within us to connect with something greater than ourselves, right?
Yeah.
To experience that sense of belonging, of being loved and accepted unconditionally.
I think most people can relate to that, yeah. Whether you're religious or not, there's this yearning for something more.
Exactly. But Father Mike suggests that this original wound creates a sense of separation from God. It might manifest as doubt, fear, or a feeling of being unworthy of God's love.
So it's like there's this barrier between us and the divine.
In a sense, yeah. We might struggle to connect with God, to feel his presence, or to trust that he's even there.
I could see how that would lead to a lot of spiritual searching, a lot of questioning and uncertainty.
Definitely. And then there's the brokenness in our relationships with each other.
Okay, let's talk about that. How does this original wound play out in how we relate to other people?
Father Mike argues that it can lead to indifference, a lack of empathy. You know, that me-first mentality that's so prevalent in our culture.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like we prioritize our own needs above others, or we struggle to see things from another person's perspective.
Exactly. And in its more extreme forms, this can lead to exploitation, manipulation, even violence. It's like we forget that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect simply by virtue of being human.
Oof, that hits close to home. We see this playing out all the time in our personal relationships, in our communities, and on a global scale. Wars, conflict, injustice. They all stem from this failure to see each other as valuable, as worthy of love and compassion.
It's like we've lost sight of that fundamental truth that we're all connected, we're all part of this human family.
And then there's the brokenness within ourselves, that inner turmoil that we all experience to some degree.
Right. Father Mike says this manifests as self-doubt, self-sabotage, addiction, that constant feeling of not being good enough, not measuring up.
We're basically at war with ourselves. I know I've definitely experienced that. It's like this inner critic that never shuts up, always pointing out my flaws and failures.
Exactly. And this is where Father Mike uses this really interesting word, concupiscence.
Concupiscence, that's a mouthful.
It is, isn't it? It sounds a bit archaic, but it basically refers to that pull we feel towards things that aren't good for us, you know, those unhealthy desires and cravings that we often struggle to resist.
Oh, okay. So it's like that voice in our head that says, just one more cookie, or go ahead and hit that snooze button, even though we know we shouldn't.
Exactly. It's that temptation to choose instant gratification over long-term well-being.
And this concupiscence, it's tied to this original wound.
According to Father Mike, yes, it's like that wound makes us more susceptible to those unhealthy desires. It weakens our resolve, makes it harder to choose the path of wisdom and virtue.
It's like we're fighting an uphill battle against our own nature.
In a way, yes. But Father Mike is quick to point out that we're not powerless. There's hope, there's healing. But that's a conversation for another time.
Okay, now you've really got me hooked. We've established that this original wound isn't just some abstract theological concept. It's having very real and very painful consequences in our lives and in the world around us. But Father Mike doesn't just leave us with this bleak diagnosis, right? He offers some solutions. I'm really curious to hear what he proposes.
You're right, he does. And he starts by acknowledging what doesn't work.
Oh, this is interesting. What does he say is a dead end when it comes to addressing this original wound?
He basically says that simply trying harder to be good, relying on social systems to fix everything, or just focusing on our basic physical needs. Those things might be important, but they're not enough to get to the root of the problem.
So he's saying we need something more than self-improvement, political activism, or even just meeting our basic needs.
Exactly. We need something that addresses that deeper spiritual wound. And that's where his message gets distinctly Christian. He argues that the only true and lasting healing comes through a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I'll admit, I've always struggled with this whole Jesus is the only way thing. How does Father Mike explain that? It can feel a bit exclusive, you know.
I get that. But Father Mike's argument centers on this idea that Jesus, being both fully God and fully human, bridges the gap between us and the divine. Through his life, death, and resurrection, he offers us forgiveness for our brokenness and empowers us to live a new way.
So it's not about earning God's love or fixing ourselves through sheer willpower. It's about accepting this gift of forgiveness and letting that transform us.
That's a great way to put it. It's about surrendering to a power greater than ourselves and allowing that power to heal the broken places within us.
And this healing, it's not a one-time event, right? It's an ongoing process.
Exactly. It's a journey. And a key player in that journey is the Holy Spirit.
Ah, the Holy Spirit. I have a feeling we could do a whole other deep dive just on that topic. But for now, let's stick with healing this original wound. What role does the Holy Spirit play in all of this?
Father Mike suggests that the Holy Spirit works in a couple of key ways. First, it brings about inner healing. It mends our broken hearts, calms our anxieties, and helps us to experience a sense of peace and wholeness that we can't achieve on our own.
So it's like this internal source of strength and comfort.
Exactly. It's that still, small voice within us that whispers, "You are loved. You are worthy. You are enough."
That's a beautiful image. And it reminds me of what some folks talk about in terms of mindfulness, self-compassion, emotional regulation, all those things that are becoming so popular these days.
I see what you mean. There are definitely parallels between ancient spiritual wisdom and modern psychological insights.
Totally. So we've got this inner healing piece. But how does that translate into better relationships with others? How does the Holy Spirit help us overcome that tendency towards indifference and exploitation that we were talking about earlier?
That's where the second aspect of the Holy Spirit's work comes in. It empowers us to make better choices, to resist those unhealthy desires, that concupiscence we were talking about, and to act in accordance with our true nature, which, according to Father Mike, is love.
So it's about tapping into this deeper capacity for love.
Exactly. He says that through the Holy Spirit, we can actually begin to love others the way Jesus loved us, sacrificially, unconditionally, and without expecting anything in return.
That's a tall order, especially in a world that can feel so transactional and self-serving.
It is challenging, no doubt, but that's where the power of the Holy Spirit comes in. It gives us the strength and the courage to choose love, even when it's hard.
So it's not about denying our human nature, but about transcending it, about tapping into something greater than ourselves.
Beautifully said. It's about recognizing that we're not just driven by our base instincts, but also by this divine spark within us that yearns for connection, for compassion, for something more.
This is all making a lot of sense. Father Mike has given us a lot to think about. I'm curious to hear what you, as our expert, found particularly insightful or surprising about his perspective. What stood out to you as a key takeaway?
Well, I think, honestly, what struck me was how Father Mike manages to bridge this gap between, traditional theology and a really modern approach. You know what I mean?
Totally. He's not afraid to use theological terms, but he explains them in a way that makes sense, even if you're not a seminary student.
Right. He's speaking to everyone, whether you're a devout Catholic or someone who's just curious about these bigger questions of life.
It's refreshing, for sure. And he doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. Like this idea that we're all wounded, that there's this inherent brokenness within us that can be a hard pill to swallow.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that he doesn't leave us there. He offers a way out, a path to healing. And that's where this whole thing with Jesus comes in, right?
Right. And I know this is where some people might tune out, but I'm curious, even if you're not a Christian, how does Father Mike's explanation of Jesus as the solution resonate with you?
Well, I think there's something universally appealing about this idea of a figure who embodies perfect love and compassion, someone who offers forgiveness and shows us a better way to live.
It's like that archetype of the wounded healer, right? Someone who's been through the fire themselves and emerged with this profound sense of empathy and understanding.
Exactly. And I think that resonates with people on a deep level, regardless of their religious beliefs. We're all drawn to stories of transformation, of overcoming adversity, of finding hope in the midst of darkness.
It's like those stories give us permission to believe that healing is possible, even for ourselves.
Absolutely. And Father Mike is very clear that this healing isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process, a journey. And a big part of that journey, he says, involves the Holy Spirit.
Okay, so let's talk about the Holy Spirit. I know for some folks that can conjure up images of doves and tongues of fire. But how does Father Mike present the Holy Spirit in a way that's relatable to a more modern audience?
Well, he describes it as this force for good, this source of love and wisdom that's available to everyone, regardless of their beliefs.
So it's not necessarily this external being that's separate from us.
Right. It's more like this inner voice, this intuition, this nudge towards compassion and kindness.
I like that. It's like that little voice that says, hey, maybe don't gossip about your coworker, or maybe reach out to that friend who's going through a tough time.
Exactly. It's that gentle reminder of our better nature, that nudge to choose love over fear, to act from a place of empathy rather than self-interest.
And Father Mike suggests that this Holy Spirit is key to healing that original wound within us.
Yes. And he says it works in a couple of ways. First, it brings about inner healing. It helps us to mend those broken places within ourselves, to find peace and wholeness amidst the chaos of life.
That makes sense. It's like this internal source of strength and resilience that allows us to face our challenges with more grace and courage.
Exactly. And then the Holy Spirit also empowers us to act differently, to make choices that are aligned with our true nature, which, according to Father Mike, is love.
So it's not just about feeling better on the inside, but also about behaving better on the outside.
Right. It's about taking that inner healing and letting it radiate outwards, letting it influence our relationships, our communities, and even the world around us.
That's a beautiful thought. And it speaks to something that I think a lot of people are hungry for these days, regardless of their religious beliefs. This desire to make a positive impact, to leave the world a little better than we found it.
Totally. And Father Mike's message gives us a framework for doing that. It reminds us that we're not just cogs in a machine, We're not just consumers or producers. We have this incredible capacity for love and compassion. And when we tap into that, we become agents of healing and transformation.
So it's not just about getting to heaven or avoiding punishment. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves so we can contribute to something larger than ourselves.
You got it. And that's what I find so inspiring about Father Mike's message. It's not about escaping this world or transcending our humanity. It's about embracing our humanity, our flaws and all, and then choosing to use our lives to make a difference.
It's a call to action almost, a call to live more consciously, more compassionately, and more purposefully.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think it's a message that resonates with people from all walks of life.
This has been such an insightful conversation. Father Mike has given us a lot to think about. And I love how you've brought your expertise to the table, helping us to unpack these complex ideas in a way that's both accessible and engaging.
Oh, thanks. I'm always happy to geek out about this stuff.
Well, we appreciate your geekiness. So for our listener, what would you say is the most important thing for them to take away from this deep dive?
That's a good question. Let me think for a sec. I guess. I think if I had to boil it all down, I'd say this. We are all wounded, but we're not broken beyond repair.
I love that. It's so hopeful. Like, yeah, life is messy, we screw up, we hurt each other, but it doesn't have to be the end of the story.
Exactly. There's always this possibility of healing, of growth, of becoming more whole and more loving.
And Father Mike seems to be suggesting that this healing isn't something we have to muscle our way through alone. There's this element of grace, this idea that we can tap into a power greater than ourselves to help us along the way.
That's a key point, yeah. It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about surrendering to something bigger, something that loves us unconditionally and wants to guide us towards wholeness.
It's almost like this radical act of trust, right? Letting go of the need to control everything and just allowing ourselves to be loved and supported.
It's definitely a shift in perspective, and it can be really challenging, especially in a culture that's so focused on self-reliance and achievement. But I think deep down, we all crave that kind of unconditional love and acceptance.
It's like that yearning for connection that we were talking about earlier, that desire to be seen and loved for who we truly are, flaws and all.
Exactly. And Father Mike reminds us that we are seen and loved not just by each other, but by God. He uses this beautiful phrase, broken and loved. Like those two things can coexist. We can be a mess and still be worthy of love.
That's such a powerful message. It's a reminder that we don't have to have it all together to be loved and accepted. In fact, it's in our brokenness that we often find the greatest opportunities for growth and transformation.
So true. And I think that's one of the things that makes Father Mike's message so compelling. It's not about denying our struggles or pretending everything's fine. It's about embracing the messiness of life and then choosing to move towards healing one step at a time.
It's a journey, not a destination, right?
Absolutely. And it's a journey we don't have to take alone. We have each other, we have our communities, and we have this incredible source of love and support in God.
Well said. And I think Father Mike would echo that sentiment wholeheartedly. He ends his talk by reminding us that we're all sick, but we're also good, broken, and loved by God, who has sent his Son to heal us, to bring us closer to him, and to restore us to that original goodness.
It's a beautiful reminder, isn't it, that even in the midst of brokenness, there's always hope. Hope for healing, hope for connection, hope for a world where love prevails.
It really is. And I think it's a message we all need to hear, especially in these times that can feel so divided and uncertain. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you again for sharing your expertise and insights with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. I always love these conversations.
Me too. And of course, a huge thank you to our listener for submitting this fascinating topic. We love exploring these ideas with you. Keep those curious minds engaged, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Until then, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep believing in the power of love to heal and transform.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us.